Hi folks, this is Hebrew for All. This may well be the first class some of you are seeing because it's really, for many of you, I'm presuming your introduction to the Hebrew language. According to my system, you're going to be able to learn how to read, write, and speak Hebrew. I call it the unified field theory of Hebrew. And if you follow my system and do the work, you're going to see amazing results. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is present to you a picture of the block letters of the Hebrew language. And I'm going to take you down and show you what they are. Now, people tend to get intimidated when they see a new language, new letters. I know I would feel somewhat intimidated, even though I'm a language teacher. Wow, new alphabet. This could be really tough. Well, I tell people the very, very beginning tends to be tough, and I encourage people, if you've got that toughness inside of you, and I think all of us do, then here's the point where you have to bring it forward a little bit and put it to use, because you'll get over this first hurdle of the alphabet and you'll be on your merry way to being able to read any Hebrew text perfectly. Okay, so first I want to point out to you that Hebrew moves right to left. That's why I've put those letters as they appear down the right hand side of the page. Now, what I'm going to be showing you here is actually the script letters, because the letters as they appear down the right side of the page are block letters, and you'll never have to learn how to write them unless you'll become a scribe, a person who writes a Torah scroll. And then there'll be very, very explicit instructions on how to write these letters. What you have to do along with me right now is learn how to recognize these block letters and then write their script letters, because writing script is the only way you're going to be able to learn how to learn effectively. So come along with me. I'm just going to show you how the things work a bit, and then in the successive classes we'll develop the ideas. The first letter on the right hand side is an Aleph, and that letter Aleph in script is written like this. Sort of looks like a C in American English, followed by a straight line. One more time. This is the first stroke, and this is the second stroke. This is the first stroke, and this is the second stroke. That's called an Aleph. Next letter down. It's a Bet, and the script letter looks quite similar to it actually. And as you can see, as I'm writing on this board, I'm not producing the exact same strokes every single time. You may want to pay attention to the order in which I make the stroke, because notice I'm starting here at the top, moving down to the right and off to the left. At the top, down to the right and off to the left. And there is neither is there a what's the right word for this? Neither is there a standardized script for the block letters or for the script letters. So every single one of us is likely to make these letters a little bit differently, and the block letters that appear on the right hand side of the page here are simply one of the fonts that exists in a Microsoft Word Hebrew program. Okay, that's the Aleph. That's the Bet, is the second one down. Here's a Gimel. The next one down, you see it's going a bit below the line. The next one down is a dalet. Followed by a hey. Again, a letter where the script looks very similar to the block. And I can assure you that only a few of the letters of the script look dramatically different than their block letters. So far we've seen two of them. I would say the Aleph and the Gimel. Here's the next letter. It's a Vav. Basically just a straight line, folks. A Zayin is the next one. Now, people, as you can guess, tend to get confused between the Zayin, this letter that we just learned now, and the Gimel up above. And I always like to mention the woman from whom I learned the Aleph Bet as a child. Actually, I learned on my father's knee, but there was a woman who was a teacher. She was a Holocaust survivor. She was a teacher of mine of Aleph Bet, and she gave me a rule that I've shared, a little tip, really, not a rule, that I've shared with a lot of people, which is that if you can stick, as it were, a capital G into the bottom, you don't actually want to do that, but if you can envision a capital G in the bottom, then you know you're dealing with the Gimel. And then, as it were, the converse of that is the Zayin. So you've got to memorize one of those ideas. The next letter is a Chet. Quite similar to the block. The next letter is a Tet. Quite similar. I'm scrolling down a teeny bit, and you get things tend to disappear for a second, so don't be alarmed. No, we stayed with it this time. Very good. That was Tet. And now I'll continue along. The next is a Yud, which in script really just comes to be a little tiny mark like that. The next is a Kaf. I call this the backward C. The next is a Lamed, a little bit different. One of the elements that might help us remember it is that it's a tall letter. Next is a Mem, which really looks like an N in English, followed by a Nun, which is like an N sound. So those are a teeny bit tricky, but it looks very, very similar. M-N, Mem Nun, if you can pick up on that kind of mnemonic. The next is a Samech, which is really just a circle in script. The next is an Ayin. Oops, get down to the bottom of the page. An Ayin. The next is a Pei. Similar but different, because the loop goes in a slightly different fashion. The next one is a Tzadi. For most people, they're helped by the fact that the Tzadi looks like the number 3. And I will scroll down to our last set of letters. There it is, folks. And then I'm going to summarize as I finish. Kuf looks quite similar. Reish looks quite similar. Shin sort of reminds us of a small E in English. And Tav. This is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. which one could say goes from Aleph to Tav. Now, what are these 5 things, 5 other letters down the right-hand side of the page? You have the Mem, which you've seen above, and then you have something called a final Mem, which is to say, when the Mem appears as the last letter of the word, it looks like this. Some people see like a P, something of a P. There's the Nun, which you've seen above, but the final Nun comes down like this, kind of a long, straight stroke. We saw the Vav of above, the Nun comes down below. The Tzadi, which I mentioned to you, is quite different, looking like the number 3. Catch this one, folks. This tends to be a little tricky for people. It seems to come out like a little bit of a Lamed, but then the tail goes up. The tail goes up. The tail goes up. That's the Tzadi. The Pei, which you remember from above, but the final form is the tail goes down. The tail goes down. This happens to be a script letter that's got a couple different forms. Watch this one. That's for lovers. You can see the little heart over there. Others do it sort of like a little bit more like a B. But the trick at the end of the day on that final Fei, I'll be explaining that in the upcoming class, with the F sound, is that the tail comes down to make it clearly contrasted to the Tzadi. And then that Kaf, which I said some people remember as the backward C, as a final letter, it looks like this. Okay, these represent, turns out to be the 22 letters of the Hebrew language, and 5 of them that repeat themselves in somewhat of a slightly different form when they're the last letter of the word. I don't like to overwhelm people in my teaching. Really what I wanted to do with you in this particular class was to give you an exposure to the letters, remind you, you will not have to write the block letters. It's going to be fine to just recognize them and learn to write the script. Knowing the script and, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the class, biting the bullet on it, recognizing it's going to be a little tough, but you're going to make it, and I'm going to walk you through it. It's going to give you the ability, through the upcoming classes, to learn to read the Hebrew language. Shalom, shalom.